In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. The different accounts of the Passion, we see that there are a few points that one of the evangelists will have that perhaps another doesn't. We see at least three of them in St. Luke's Gospel. We hear about the quote from Hosea about, "They will say to the hills, fall on us upon, and then the mountains cover us," and so on. We hear our Lord speaking to the women of Jerusalem in St. Luke's account. But the one that I want to focus on is the one that comes only also in St. Luke's account, and that is the sweating of blood. It is a point that people have not understood. The people translating the scriptures, it makes no sense to them, and so they try and find creative ways of getting around what it is that St. Luke is saying. But you have to remember, St. Luke was a doctor. If he's going to be describing something that's medical, he's going to be describing it in a way that's quite precise. And that's exactly what he does. And so, again, how do you translate some of these things becomes the issue. So we heard that his sweat became like drops of blood. Well, that's not what St. Luke said. What it says in the Greek is thromboi hematos, blood clots. And it's like, how does that happen? How that happens is something that's called hematidrosis. It's something that's known to medicine. It's a very, very rare occurrence. It only happened a handful of times in the last century. And it happens usually in the face of something that is very painful, fearful, oncoming thing where the tension is just so tremendous. What happens is that the blood vessels under the skin all explode. And when the blood then that's under the skin comes in contact with the sweat, which the person would be sweating profusely at that point, it actually comes out of the skin, becomes like blood clots, and falls to the ground. Exactly what St. Luke says happens. However, what we have to understand in that is not so much that, okay, St. Luke got it right, isn't that amazing? What's important for us to understand is what this did to our Lord. Because when this occurs, it makes the skin and over the entire body extraordinarily sensitive to touch, even more so to the beating that he was going to take in the next day. And I say that to be able to point out that if you go through the different points that are there in the different points of the Passion, they show that our Lord made this as bad as it could have been. If there's something that could have been worse, that's what he would have done. But he didn't, because it couldn't get any worse. Even just the little points that we might not even think about. They gathered the whole cohort around them. Remember, the 10th Legion was already in Jerusalem, and we're told, as we heard in the Gospel today, because that was another one that's only in St. Luke's Gospel, the point about Herod, that means another 1,000 soldiers would have come. They all would have been at the Antonia fortress. So other than the soldiers that were out on the streets, you had just about 2,000 soldiers that were there, cheering uproariously as they would have been flogging our blessed Lord. Remember, the Romans hated the Jews, and they couldn't do anything to them. Now the Jews, the high priest, turned over a Jew and said, go ahead and do whatever you want to him. And so they did. Once again, just that little passage that the whole cohort gathered around, we just let it go in one eye and out the other, but it actually has a lot to it when you think of the mob psychology that would have been at work in what would have been going on. You see it rather clearly, for instance, in the movie of the Passion, just how brutally they beat him. And so, again, it just gives us something to think about as we proceed over these next couple of days. to think about what our Lord endured for us. And it's not just a matter of what he endured, which, again, as I mentioned, is as bad as it could be on every single point, but we have to ask why. Certainly it is out of love for us, but as we know, one drop of our Lord on the ground would have been all of his blood. That's all that would have been necessary to save the entire world. And as I have often asked, how many of us would actually believe that? Oh, isn't that amazing? He put one drop of blood on the ground. My soul is saved. Right, we wouldn't buy that for a split second. And the tragedy is that in human nature, if he would have lessened anything, we would dance our way around it and say, well, it could have been worse. See, he didn't love completely. It wasn't enough. Maybe my sins aren't forgiven because it could have been worse. It couldn't have been worse. That's the whole point. So for our lack of faith and for our lack of charity, he made sure that there was no way that we could weasel around this, that we have to believe and to accept what it is that he did and just how brutal it was. Because it was. We live in a country where we don't suffer much. And so we make the crucifixes look real pretty, like he's having a nice time up there. Go to a country where they suffer a lot and the crucifixes are bloody because the people understand it and they know that they were united with our Lord in his suffering. So again, to remember who this is. I may have told you this before, but I remember when that movie of The Passion came out 20 years ago. I was standing in line in the grocery store. There were two teenage kids that were talking about the movie, and the one kid looks at the other and goes, yeah, I don't know. There's no way just a human being could have done that. It's like, bingo, kid, did you know what you just said? He's God. He's not just a human being. This is what God did for us. This is what God allowed us to do to him to save our souls. That's the part we have to be able to understand as we go through these next couple of days. And to keep in mind especially that all of it, remember as we go into tomorrow, that the Last Supper took place after the sun went down. That again is an important little point as you work through the next couple of days, because sundown is when the day begins and ends for the Jewish people. So Friday began at sundown, which means our Lord was betrayed. He went out to the garden. All of that which we look at as on Thursday night, all of that happened on Friday, according to Jewish time. So all of the events of the Passion took place on Friday. And then he was in the tomb on Saturday. And so, again, just the timing of these things and the way that he did it, everything that he did, all has meaning and all has purpose. And it's ultimately for us. So when you come to those little details, don't let them go in one eye and out the other. Stop and ask, why is that there? What does this mean? How does this apply? And really look seriously at that, to be able to take it into yourself and then be able to recognize this is how much the Lord loves me.